Hi, it's Brigida, and I want to give you a quick lesson on the IB standard level paper 1. Without further ado, let me share my screen. Okay, so here we go. So so again, this is IB English Language and Literature Paper 1 standard level, and that makes a difference. So, this is the new examination this year. The change from previous years is that one of the changes is that it's 1 hour and 15 minutes instead of an hour and a half. So I've prepared this so that to take you through the basic steps on how to answer or how to respond to the text. So the first thing you do is you decide which text to analyze. So you have two choices, and they're probably going to be two different text types. So they can be anything. It could be an instruction manual, poem, just an image, or an advertisement, a travel blog. You name it, any type of text it could be. So a good idea would be to practice with text types a little bit to identify some of the features of different types of text prior to the exam. But on the exam itself, you obviously would have to have a little prior knowledge, so that's another lesson. But spend a maximum of 5 minutes choosing between the two texts, and choose the one, obviously, that you feel you have the best understanding of, or the type of text that you have the best understanding of. So next, you're going to give it an initial reading where you kind of try to figure out just the overall message. And there's a prompt or a question at the bottom of the text for a standard level. And that question or direction or prompt usually gives you kind of a hint about what the text is about. So, so just look at the question before you read through and keep it in mind, and then just read through and try to figure out what's the gist of it, what's the message, think of what could possibly be a thesis, maybe. So then the next step is you're going to formulate a thesis statement. As you see here, there's a link, and here I'm going to try to post this. I'm going to post this with my video on the site here, so you can click into all these links. But SOAPstone is an acronym for Speaker, Occasion, Audience, Purpose, Subject, and Tone. It's a good acronym to remember, just to try to figure out, the basic parts of the text that you may want to comment on. Speaker, audience, speaker, occasion, audience, subject, purpose, subject, tone. Okay. Okay, so thesis statement. So again, there's a link. You can how to formulate a thesis statement. This is a separate video, but it's supposed to be a single sentence and state pretty clearly what your impression is of the text is, and hint at what ways the author is conveyed. Not hint, but also include what the ways that the author conveys that message. So we'll get to that in a minute. So the next step is to read through the text one more time, and this time you want to annotate. I have another link here for how to annotate. That's another video. But you want to read through and comment on the most important parts, maybe ask yourself some questions, identify some phrases or literary devices in the text, and look for patterns. Most of all, look for patterns. Does the author use a certain motif? Does the author use certain symbolism or metaphors? Or is there something about the sentence construction or punctuation that you see as a pattern in the text that you may want to comment on? And in support of the thesis statement, right? Or in support, how is the message conveyed through literary features? That's the overarching question as you read. So the next step is, after about 5 minutes or 10 minutes of reading that, you should have found 3 or 4 major ways in which the author conveys the message. So choose choose at least 2 quotes from each. Sometimes there's a development throughout the text too, so look for that. You know, is there a change in tone or perspective? Look for that. So for example, here is, you know, religious natural imagery is one thing. Religious symbolism, ironies. There are ironies throughout the text. Is there a war motif? Or is there rhythm, you know, in a poem, or even other texts can have a rhythm. So there's lots of things to comment on. Just look for patterns. What does this particular text have that you notice? And then the next step here is to begin to plan to write, right? So you want to write out your full thesis statement. And here's a sample of that, because the thesis statement is kind of hard to come up with sometimes, especially under pressure on an exam. So for example, here, in The Mask of the Red Death, Edgar Allan Poe uses the symbolism of the stranger, the clock, and the 7th room to develop the theme of death, right? So here's 3 items. So in this text, he uses these in order to, you know, show the theme of death, right? Symbolism of the stranger appearing throughout the text, the clock appearing throughout time, time symbolism appearing throughout the text, and the 7th room, which is specific to this text, right? So what does it mean is what you're trying to convey. Step 7, now plan each of your 3 paragraphs. So select 2 quotes for each, one from the beginning, maybe one from the middle or the end, but you probably don't have more than a couple for a 1 hour and 15-minute essay, when you also include the reading and annotating and all of that. So for each quote, write a few words in an outline that will help you analyze the language in the quote. So once you've completed this for all of your paragraphs, start writing. So at this point, you would have spent maybe 30 minutes total to analyze, review, and so forth. So considering you have an hour and 15 minutes total, you have about 45 minutes to write the whole essay, which is enough because you already have a good roadmap and a plan, and it's going to benefit you later. I'll get to that when we get to the grading. So the next step is begin the commentary by introducing. So let's start with the introduction. So in this, that's when soapstone, again, speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, subject, tone, becomes important, because it's, when you're stressed at an exam, you may want to it's a good acronym to remember what is important about this text, or what is something I can, talk about in the introduction as I introduce the text. So you'd start with a text type, then you'll, address from what perspective, that speaker, what's the inciting event. Let's say it's an article and you want to show, maybe it's about something that has happened in real time, right? Audience is never general, by the way. It's always specific audience, either within a region, a country, or age group, or man, woman, you name it, depends, right? So so then you start with the text type, address what is the text, what are the important features of this particular text. It may be different for each depending on what it is. Thesis statement, you want to state the thesis statement as we said, and then and with the thesis statement, one point about that, avoid vague descriptions. So instead of saying, for example, the author conveys this message through structure, form, and tone, you can say, add an adjective. So the author conveys this message through chastic structure, war motif, or somber tones. You add an adjective, and that makes it more specific. Then next, go into your first paragraph, and there's a way to structure those, another video. But point, illustrate, explain. So point, you make your point, what that, what's the point you want to make? How does the author convey a message through a specific literary device, for example? Illustrate it with a quote or two, and explain or analyze, how that quote conveys the message through the literary device, for example. Okay, so that's called the PI method, separate video. Okay, and then you do that for each of your paragraphs until you get to your conclusion. So in your conclusion, much like your introduction, it should be short. And basically you have to summarize the main points and how these build towards your thesis statement. So here, you kind of reference your thesis statement again and show that it's how how the message has been conveyed or how the meaning has been conveyed. But it's also good to add one more thing if you can, if you have time. And so has this thesis statement made you think, as you read the text, something more deeply about it? So it could be, speaking to a larger issue in society, or make a connection to something else. It depends a lot on the text. We can talk about that also. I have another video I'm going to make for conclusions. So, okay. Finally, understand how you are graded. So criterion A, understanding interpretation. So basically what the IB is looking for there is, did you understand the central message in the text? Do you get the gist of the text? So one of the first few steps we went through, that's, and also, do you understand like basically how that message is conveyed? That also may fit into there. So that appears basically in the first introductory paragraph and obviously throughout the text. But then criterion B, appreciations of the writer's choices. And this is one area where a lot of students, this is maybe the hardest one, is to identify the literary devices or features, meaning how it's structured, punctuation, and things like that. So rhythm, rhyme, etc. Appreciation of the writer's choices in narration, in linguistic choices, basically. Criterion C is organization and development. I can't speak today. So organization is basically what you did for the first 30 minutes when you structured your text. And if you did all those steps, or if you went through all those steps and kind of planned your essay that way, you should do pretty well in this criteria here. And then finally, language. So my only suggestion for that, obviously, read, write as much as you can, because that's the best way to become a better reader and writer. But that said, let's say it's 5 minutes before the exam and you just want something quick. So what you want to do is use the most precise vocabulary possible and avoid slang and abbreviations. And use a formal language, but I can't stress this enough, because we're so used to texting and writing short messages, and there's some leeway in those formats for informal language. But for this purpose, go through, make sure everything that's capitalized needs to be capitalized, and avoid abbreviation, slang, and use formal language as much as you can, and you should be good to go. Thank you for listening.